sharing this, I would have probably got my mom along with me. She would be very proud today. Hey, great guys. So the topic is a bit challenging, right? When to scale and when to sell. So I'm not really sure how many people start a venture to sell. So I don't know about that. But one thing is for sure. All you guys who are in this auditorium today you guys are immensely lucky. Right? When we started Taxi for Sure 3 years back, we didn't have a forum like this, right? And whatever the challenges that we had to face during our journey, right? We had to deal it on our own. We didn't really have people to talk to. We didn't really have how to deal with things and stuff like that. I think probably we did a whole lot of mistakes. And to get to a $200 million exit, it took us around 3 to 3.5 years. And all the people here, because of this particular forum, I think you would get there a lot more sooner. I think that's the way the life is. All of us live to learn. Great. So before I talk about when to sell or when to scale, right? There are a few common parameters that would really exist. One is the idea. Second is the team. Third is the execution, right? Whether you're looking at a business to either to sell or to scale, these three things are common. So let me probably start with the idea piece, then the team piece, and then execution. Then I'll probably get into the actual when to make the decision between scaling and selling, right? So when we had the idea of Taxi for Sure, so that was in way back in August 2010. So both Apramaya and me, my co-founder Apramaya and me, both of us used to have we had a very lushy corporate jobs, right? And when we got this idea, so when we did some second research over Google, we didn't really find any company which was similar to this, right? This was not really a rip-off from something that was already existed. Uber also started end of 2010, so there was no mention of Uber on the social media. It was not like Flipkart started nearly a decade later, a decade after Amazon. So it was not really a rip-off. So because of which, what we did was we didn't share our idea with anyone. We thought that this is our IP, right? We used to speak to a lot of people, but we never shared our idea with anyone, right? And we didn't really make any kind of progress anywhere. Right, we wasted around 6 to 8 months because we thought that the idea is our IP, and if we start sharing the idea with people, they would stop doing whatever they're doing and they would start a company like that, right? And we did the same thing with the investors also. I know that some of the investors are here, but so we thought that if we tell the investors, probably investors know better people who could do a better job than what we could do. So I think that's the first mistake that we did. So once we let go of that, I think things started moving at a significant pace for us. No one told us that you should probably share the idea, right? So that you'll get a lot of help, right? And once we crossed the stage, we became shameless. Even though people didn't want to listen to what we were doing, right? We were telling them, this is what Taxi for Sure does, this is what it does, and stuff like that. And over a time, I think that helped. Right, so we started when both Apu and I were 29 years old, right, and both of us were B school graduates, and so we wanted to get a technology guy, and I'm a computer science engineer from NITK Surathkal, and so we thought that we have a lot of our batchmates who are still in the engineering domain, so it's very easy to really get them on board. So when we spoke to our friends, what we realized was all these guys had housing loans. Right, then we thought that okay, so they told us, okay, I'm ready to join. I believe in the idea. I'm ready to join. I believe in you guys. But the thing is, you have to ensure that I get my housing loan paid. First of all, we didn't really have any money, and we were trying to bootstrap, right? And we couldn't really do that. And so after some time, we started asking them whether they have got younger sisters or younger brothers who could probably join, who don't really have a housing loan. That's how we started. And because we were shameless and we were talking to people about our ideas, one guy told us that there is this person who just quit because of some differences with his management. He might be available. And thankfully we got the guy on board, and he's been with the company, and he was the one who was instrumental in building the entire technology backend of Taxi for Sure. That's essentially how it happens. And why this is important is because we didn't know how to build a culture of a company, right? And both Apram and I, so post my engineering, I worked with a company called Texas Instruments. And post that, I worked with a company called Feedback Ventures. Both of them were large-scale companies, and when we went there, the culture was already set, and we just blend into that culture. And when we started, only two of us started this. We didn't know how to start a culture, right? We always knew what a culture was, and we just blend into that, right? When this first person came on board, right, what we realized was the way both of us behaved, right, and we could see the difference in the performance of that third individual, right? Then we figured out, okay, what is the kind of behavior that both of us should have that would essentially get the best out of that particular individual. And the more and more we started looking at that, right, we realized that if you start treating the person as a peer, right, he gets the best out of us, and that essentially became the entire foundation behind the company culture, right? And because he was in a different company, and he came because of his differences with his top management, and he came with us, and when we realized that the way he performs essentially does that, right? So being open and transparent became the core of the company culture, right? And because of this, we were able to excite a lot of people to come and join the company. And after that, I think every founder who starts the company would essentially focus on execution. There are certain metrics that they would really pursue, and I think that would really go through that, right? So the next important thing is, irrespective whether we're going to scale and sell, the investors, right? How do you pick and choose the investors, right? So I think we didn't really make any mistake in choosing our investors, because one of our investors is sitting here. Right? No, we didn't really make any mistake that way. So when we are talking about the growth story, right? So there is a different stages in which a company really grows. Okay, there is a seed round, there is a Series A, Series B, Series C round, right? And I'm not really sure how many people have engaged with the investor community, right? So every investor has a typical reserved money for a single startup, right? If a fund is 100 million or 250 million or 500 million, so every fund has some sort of a reserve. So let's say if it is $5 million, right? They don't put the entire $5 million in the first round. They probably put $1 to $2 million. In the next round, they would essentially do pro rata, put another 1 million, 2 million, right? In the third round, they do that, right? Because of which, what really happens is, at every stage of fundraising, one has to really get an investor who can essentially who has the ability to do the pro rata for the next round, right? So that you get a bunch of people for seed, right? They can do pro rata. At Series A, you need to get someone who can do pro rata at the Series B, right? At Series B round, you need to get someone who can do pro rata at the Series C round, because the guys who came in the seed round will not have any money left probably to participate in the C round and the D round. And it's very it's very easy to essentially do an internal round, right? Where okay, I don't want to spend too much of time in raising capital, so my current set of investors only have access to capital, and let me take the money from them, right? It's a easy way out, but the thing is that there's a lot of challenges if the existing investors are not going to participate, right? It's going to become significantly challenging to get an external guy, right? So what I urge all you guys is to not to take the easy way out, right? Even though it's going to be time consuming, it's difficult, always get an external, at least one external investor at every round of funding. And it goes along. It's an investment. You spend the time, spend that effort, spend those resources to always get an external investor at subsequent rounds of funding. It goes a long way. If you want to do an internal round, the existing investors will be more than happy to do that, because for the same amount of money, probably they will get a larger share. But the thing is, you are going to exhaust all the capital that those guys have. And in case if there is a rainy day, if the 2008 time repeats again, you need to have that kind of a reserve capital from your existing pool of investors. When the entire market probably tanks, your existing investors should have some money, so that they would essentially help you to stay through that period. If you eat up all those money when the things are good, then you will be doing injustice. So you have a brilliant idea, an awesome team, but you don't have access to capital. So essentially, if the market would essentially so forget scaling or selling, probably existence becomes a challenge. So that's essentially how we probably need to really look at things, right? So once let's say you have an idea, you have a brilliant team, and you're executing beautifully, right? And then you have a great bunch of investors, right? And one more part of the investors is, so we raised our seed round of funding when we were 6 months old. right? And both Appu and I are from Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, right? And so most of the people would think that it's a lot more easy for people like us to raise investments. And when Accel Partners and Helion Ventures told us that they're going to invest in the company, right? We were super happy, primarily because 5 years before we passed out and 5 years after we passed out, there are so many companies that IMA grad started. None of them were funded by these guys. None of them were funded. Majority of them were not funded at all, and not like a VC such as an Accel Partners or a Helion Ventures, right? So I think we got carried away, right? Because Accel Partners 6 months into the company exists, we were just talking to them because we thought it was the right thing to do, right? Not necessarily looking at they would say yes to us. And historically also they had not invested in any company which was only 6 months old. That's how we started. So we were talking to them to raise 50 lakh rupees, right? And they gave a term sheet for 5 crore rupees, right? And we were extremely happy, right? And the valuations, we were a 6 months old company and the valuation was in double-digit crores, right? And we were like, okay, what did we do? We have done something phenomenal, right? And we got carried away. So what we probably didn't do then was, so when I look back, right? So one of the eyes, the introspection, when we look back, right? So we got carried away with the amount of money that we raised and the valuation that we got, right? And we probably ignored the terms of the term sheet, the other terms of the term sheet, right? And what we realized as we progressed is the quantum of money that you raise keeps on increasing, right? And the valuation that you at which you raise will also keeps on increasing, but the terms that or the term sheet remains the same. Those things gets carried forward, right? So whenever you raise seed capital or any Series A, Series B round of funding, right, concentrate more on the terms or the term sheet than on the value, the amount of money that you raise and the valuation. Yeah, it's very difficult to do that because I think people get a lot excited by that, but I think value, amount of money that is raised and the valuation keeps changing. It's the terms that gets carried forward. And is that those are written in stone and it will never be changed? Pretty hard for those, whatever that you agreed on the seed round, if those terms have to change, probably it would happen probably at the Series C or the Series D round when you are going at a very, very phenomenal pace, right? And not many companies would typically grow at that kind of a pace. So that's a way to really look at it, right? And when to scale? I don't know. I frankly don't know what is the right time to really scale, right? I think there are a few learnings there. So thankfully we had a few common investors between Redbus and Flipkart, right? So Helion were investors in Redbus and they were investors in Taxi for Sure, and Accel Partners were investors in Flipkart and they were investors in Taxi for Sure. So when we were growing month on month, right, when we were 2 years old and stuff like that, the rate at which we were growing was much faster than the rate at which Redbus and Flipkart were growing, right? 2x to 3x times month on month, right? So was that a good growth rate? We thought it was, but when I look back, I think probably we could have done a lot better job than what we did, right? So the way we really ran the business, we started comparing ourselves to other big startups, right, in similar industries or different industries, and we started comparing it and growing it. And since we were growing at a rate much faster than what Flipkart was growing at, and we thought that we were growing at a very good rate, and we didn't really push ourselves enough. We were happy. I think we were satisfied a bit too early, too soon. Right? That's essentially when how it happened. When the market was conducive for much faster growth and the environment was conducive, the investors were very, very supportive. But we were happy with what we were doing, right? And the bigger problem, I think, which most of the entrepreneurs face is when you are growing at a very, very rapid pace, right? So there are so many things that are happening within the company, right? Internal to the company, that the entrepreneurs are so focused internally. They typically neglect whatever is happening outside, right? And that's essentially caught me off guard, right? We never really looked outside because there were so many things, so many battles to be fought internally. So there was no time to really look at what was happening outside the world, right? So the mobile penetration in India had increased significantly, right? The number of internet users in India had increased significantly. A lot of taxi apps had which started much later than we started, right? Had grown much more exponentially across the world. So we didn't really look at what was happening across the world, right? And that's the reason we didn't really push the pedal soon enough, rather. Right. So the point here is, even though there are so many burning things that is happening within the company, I think at least if there are multiple founders in a company, one of them essentially has to anchor that responsibility of looking what is happening elsewhere. Right, not just if all the founders are focusing what is happening within the company, right? The targets, the metrics, the MIS, the investor relations and stuff like that, right? If no one is looking outside, we don't know how are we with respect to where the market is. So we were comparing ourselves 2013 Taxi for Sure to a 2008 Flipkart and a Redbus, right? But the thing is, they didn't have the luxury that we had. The internet penetration in India was so low in 2008 compared to 2013, right? And we were happy with that, right? So there are a lot of companies here, right, which would probably grow at a much faster rate than what Taxi for Sure grew at, right? But the thing is that what you guys have to really compare is, you'll be comparing 2013, 2014 Taxi for Sure with the 2015, 2016, 2017 of your company, right? And if you are not growing at a much faster rate than Taxi for Sure, then there is a problem. If you're growing at a much faster rate than Taxi for Sure, you have to really compare what else is happening outside, right? And that would be the right reference. I mean, you get a high when you feel that you are growing much faster than some of the larger companies in the ecosystem, but you have to really look at, you need to be within the times. You need to one has to understand the context and the circumstances that one is in to really do that, right? Unless we do that, we will never get to know where we are, right? So. So now coming to the topic, right? So typically, I know that there are a few people who essentially build a company to sell, right? And we didn't really build Taxi for Sure to sell, right? We saw an opportunity and we felt that we can probably deliver on that opportunity, and we had a great solution at our disposal, and that's essentially how we started approaching building Taxi for Sure, right? And why is it relevant here, right? So is when you are essentially growing the company, right, there is a very little difference between the company and you. What you think is what the company is thinking, right? And because I think this particular point is very, very relevant, because when you come to the sell part of the story, right, there is a difference that really comes. What the company wants and what you are thinking are going to be becoming divergent, because you're essentially exiting, right? So I'll come to that in a short while, right? So when you're thinking about, okay, what the company wants and what you're thinking is going to be the same, right? Whether you scale or you sell, the approach has to be the same, because as soon as you sell, right, the company cannot shut down. The company has to continue running its operations, right? The only thing that would really change is you are not going to be part of the company. Right? So there is nothing that would really change with respect to the company, whether you scale or you sell. The scale or the selling option is only the founder's prerogative, right? Not the company's. Because after you sell also, the company still has to continue running its operations, right? And that's very fundamental. So if you are really looking at it that way, right, irrespective whether you sell or scale, right, the first thing that once you essentially get an exit, right, the first thing that would really happen is the founders are going to go out. If the founders are going to go out, what will happen to the company, right? So if you have that kind of a thought process behind it, then you essentially put in place certain systems, certain processes, certain people who would continue to run the company the way you would have run it after you were not there, right? So the point that I'm trying to make here is, don't have dependencies. It's very good, or it feels really good to have that sense of power in the company, where whatever that you ask, whatever it is that you do, and all the people dependent on you. It's a great feeling, right? The kind of responsibility that you run, the kind of commitments that you take on your shoulders, right? It's a great feeling. But the thing is, you're not doing any justice to yourself, not your team, because if there is a exit opportunity because you haven't really built that kind of a redundancy within the company, right? Even though if you want to, you cannot, right? And if you don't, if, even though, but you agree to essentially exit out of the company, but you haven't really built those systems, processes, and the people to take care of it, then all the people that you got on board, right, not just your employees and all your partner networks, what would happen to those guys? Right, and that's where the real crux of the situation is, right? So if you don't think that the business is what you think it is, right, it's very, very difficult to build a great team. If those people don't see the passion oozing out of you and the energy that you showcase, why would the people come and join you? Right, and you can't really tell people that, okay, so I'm building this brilliant company and I'm going to exit out in the next 2 years. Right, come and join me. I will leave, but you have to continue. Right, so you typically don't build it that way. Right, the way you build it is, okay, this is this brilliant opportunity, this is this idea, this is the opportunity, and this is the way we are trying to solve it, and this is the kind of traction that we have seen. Right, get people excited by the vision that you have and the energy that you prosper. And I think a mark of a true leader is leading by example. If people see that you are essentially leading, so one is the words and second is the actions. If there is a synchronous, if the words and actions are in sync, then it's a lot more easy to build a brilliant team. And once you have a brilliant team, then you are going to be, the dependency on you as an individual starts reducing significantly. Right, and that's essentially how to really go about doing it, right? And it has to be that how the company is going, what the founder is thinking. They are, both of them have to be in sync, right? And that's essentially how it really goes. Now the question is, if you have a brilliant idea, build an awesome team, and executing brilliantly, right? You don't have to go to the market to sell. You'll get a lot of inbound requests. Right, not necessarily by your competition, but by some strategic investors also. Right, probably someone, let's say someone like an IPO group, right, who have got probably flights, who are looking at train ticket booking, who are looking at bus ticket booking. They want to get into the taxi space also. You get a lot of people. There are a lot of companies, Make My Trip, IPO. There are a whole lot of companies out there, right? But you need to have a great team. You need to have doing a brilliant execution. So then there is a lot of inbound request. Right? So as soon as you get an inbound request, would you sell? Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because if you feel that you can grow at a much faster rate with the way you are doing, and it doesn't really make sense for you to sell. So you continue doing that, right? And that's what we did. We were getting a lot of inbound requests over a period of time. So then when do you sell? Right? So that's a question. The way we looked at, I don't know what is the ideal thing and ideal place or the ideal time to really sell, but the way we looked at it was diminishing returns, right? The money that we were raising, the effort that we were putting, right, was giving us lower returns than what it was giving us a bit earlier, because the market had changed. Right, because there was so much of subsidies, so much of incentives, so much of aggressive pricing that had come into the market, right? So for every dollar that we were spending, right, the kind of returns that we were getting started shrinking, right? The more and more effort that we put, it started shrinking, right? And that's when we thought probably this might be the time for us to essentially exit. Right. So if you ask me if there was still more opportunity in the taxi space, I still believe there's a brilliant opportunity in the taxi space. Right. But when do you sell? When you see that because there was more money spent competing than building a business, creating value. Right. And the value was shrinking for everyone, be it for the investors, for the founders, and for the employees also, and for the partners as well. It was shrinking dramatically. Right, and that's when we thought probably if we continue going down this path, I think we would essentially erode all the value that we have created over the last 3.5 years. That's when we took a call that probably it might be the best time for us to exit. Right, and that's a call that we did. Now, once you make the decision, that's when the challenge starts. Right, probably the decision is the easy bit. Right, if you keep the emotions outside, because emotions play a very big role in this. right? Because you build something and this has been the part of your life. You sleep with your status problems, you wake up with the solutions to those problems, and this is what life would be, right, for people. So emotional will be very very difficult, but if you cross that emotional hurdle, right, the real challenge starts now. Now from now on, once you decide to exit, right, to sell the company, right, now what the company is thinking and what you're thinking are going to be different. Trust me, it is one of the most difficult thing to do, and it takes a whole lot of time to really get to that kind of frame of mind, right? Because till then, you always thought that what you are thinking and what the company is thinking are the same thing. So what you think, your thoughts are the strategy for the company, and you essentially go complete, you accelerate with that, right? And the next thing is, once you essentially decide to exit, what the company's strategy is, right, and what you're thinking are divergent, are not really the same, right? And the challenge also happens, the team that you were working with, where one of the founding pillars was open and transparent. Now you can't be open and transparent, right? Because things are still in the discussion stages, right? You don't know whether it will happen or not, right? At a founder level, it's probably very easy to reconcile that you were looking at exiting out of the company, but probably the things didn't really work out, and you get back and still running the business. When you're talking about the employees, right, it would be very difficult for those people to reconcile, because everyone, the first thing that they want to understand after is that we are exiting, we are selling the company. People will ask what will happen to my job. Unless you have answer to that question, you can never breach that particular topic with those guys, and that's how it really starts. So once you, so then that's when so the way you are talking within the company is a bit different, and what you are thinking is a lot different, and that's essentially how it starts really going. And when you have inbound requests, at least we didn't have to really go into the market and start looking at who would really do that, right? And we started looking at so because of the inbound requests, we start looking at which of the inbound requests that would really make sense, and how do we do that, right? There was an inbound request from Ola. Right, Ola wanted to really do that because we are essentially becoming a big, very difficult. We have become very difficult for them to really scale themselves because of our existence, right? So once Ola was there, so when we decided to sell, Ola was around. So what we did was we got another guy on the table, which was Uber, right? And historically, Uber hasn't really done any kind of such kind of a deals elsewhere in the world, and they don't believe in acquisition. So what they believe is because they have the money and they have a great product, they believe that with or without any domestic players, they can still win the market, right? And if you're trying to exit and you have only one buyer, right, then there is no negotiating leverage. And if that person knows that I'm the only one who's essentially willing to put a price to this, there is no leverage, right? And so then you need to really look at who are the other people who could essentially possibly get into this, right? And so if you have built a business and built with great execution, right? And because Uber and we were competing, they didn't really know how we were running the business, right? And so since we had decided that we will exit, right? We were open to share some information with Uber, which got them excited to a certain extent that for the first time they changed their philosophy of not acquiring companies. They changed because that's the way. So that's the reason. So if you have an idea, you have a brilliant team, and you are very awesome at execution, right? Even any company would be willing to consider you guys, right? And that's a way to really do that, right? So you don't really build a company for scale or selling or something like that. Go after a great idea, build a great team, execute brilliantly, right? So we got Uber onto the table, right? So now the trick starts, right? So Uber gave a valuation which was phenomenally higher than the 200 million that we got from Ola Cabs. Ola started with a $200 million offer, right? Uber realized that the way to essentially see the deal is to put a huge markup. So the Uber offer was much larger than the $200 million offer. But the only problem with Uber was Uber across the world they had 845 people, and we were 2,000 people in India, right? Because of the model that we followed. So Uber didn't know what to do with our people, right? So and Uber took a call that technology, product, marketing, analytics, they don't need, because everything is based off US, right? What they need is someone who understands the operations, and they don't want to run a call center and stuff like that, right? And what we realized was around 90% of our people would be laid off, if you take the Uber deal, right? And that's essentially how things were positioned. So then that's when we started thinking, right? So we were two of us with a good idea, right? And I don't know whether we were the first ones in India to get that idea, right? Or are we the only ones to get that particular idea, right? I think there were a whole lot of people. I think when Taxi for Sure started, there were around 12 other people, 12 other companies on a similar model as Taxi for Sure, right? And those people didn't succeed, but we succeeded. And we thought, so for the reason for us to really get here, right, to where we are, and the kind of opportunities that we were exposed to at that particular instant of time, be it Ola and Uber, was primarily because of the kind of people that we had, the kind of team that we had built, right? And probably we'll be a lot richer by taking the Uber deal, right? And there will be a lot of people who would be laid off. Right? But we thought that may not be fair. That may not be fair to people, right? So what we decided was we'll not take the Uber offer, but we will probably now start discussing with Ola, right? So the first thing that we did when we spoke to Ola was to tell that Uber is offering us XYZ $1 million. So then the first reaction to Ola, the Ola people are, okay, should we match it? So we told them, don't match it. So we will stick to $200 million. But what we want is none of our people should be fired. The brand has to continue, and both the companies have to run in parallel. And every single member of the TFS team should get 2 months bonus, because we built the company. We agree that we spent our blood, sweat, and tears to build Taxi for Sure. I guess all the people who joined us early or who joined Taxi for Sure when it was a startup, right? They also get the same blood and sweat, tears, and it's unfair for us to only for us to make money, and other people also should really make money, right? And that's what we told them, right? And we asked for some ESOP acceleration as well. So we put this as the central part of the negotiation. Since we didn't negotiate on the financials, right, we were able to get all the other things that we wanted, right? And I think Ola was more stuck on the XYZ valuation that Uber had given. They thought that probably they would lose it if they don't agree to that, right? And so it's from a founder's perspective, it's very, very important to really figure out what one's priorities are while building the business. If you are building a business to make money, I think there are several opportunities to really make money, right? And what we've realized, or what I've realized over the last 3.5 years is, see, Taxi for Sure idea was a brilliant idea, right? No doubts about that. And because of the circumstances and the context that we got ourselves into, we are out of that, right? We are out of that. But the thing is, the team that we built still respects us, still trusts us. So what we've realized is, ideas are not permanent, but people are. Right? If I probably come up with another idea, I would be able to build a great team once again, take a lot lesser time than that. And if you have a great team which thinks like you, behaves like you, believes in you, and respects you, trusts you, they can build a phenomenal business in a much, much shorter period of time. That's the way we looked at it, and we put everything on the people, right? And we put people as the central part of our negotiation, and that's how we went ahead and did the deal, right? And because of that, right, Ola is not letting go of our people, right? The brand still continues, right? And everyone has a job. And once that was done, right, so that's the way we really did it. And so once we made an announcement to the people that this is what is happening, we had an answer to the subsequent question, what will happen to my job? Right? It was a lot more easier, even though we didn't really inform them at the very beginning, but whenever we informed them, we had answers to all their questions, and people understood why we didn't inform them. Right? And the people still remain in the company, and that's more important. And there is absolutely no attrition. Right? Whatever little attrition that we have is primarily because around 12 of them wants to start something on their own. Right? We made it look so simple to start a company that people feel that they also, if Raghu and Appu can do it, I can also do it. I think that's a great thing, right? But I think the sell-off story probably doesn't end there, right? And so one is once you decide. Second thing is post-decision till you make an announcement, right? How do you negotiate the deal and how do you make that announcement to the people, right? Once you do all that, right, that's when I think the real work starts, wherein you have to ensure that all the people are retained. No point in telling some people that your job is intact, so you don't have to really look out anywhere else. But once the transition really happens, if 80% of the marketing team doesn't remain in the company, what will happen to the 100% engineering team? What will happen to the 100% product team, 100% operations analyst team? They will never be able to grow, right? And so that's where it really stands. So currently, that's the role that we are playing, right? So where we have to ensure, so we negotiate a good deal with Ola guys, right? But we need to ensure that we don't leave anyone hanging in between, right? We just can't set up the new team for failure, right? So we made our money, the money is in the bank, right? We don't really have any obligation, we don't really continue to do that, and we're not getting anything paid also for the next 3 months. But the thing is, you just can't set up the new team for failure. The new team believed in you because you asked them to continue, you asked them to run the operations, they are able to do that, right? And that's essentially where it is, right? Irrespective whether you look at scaling the business or selling the business, right? The team has to be in place, right? Because we built a team in such a way that there is no dependency on us. We can probably leave the combined entity within the next 3 months, right? There is not much role for us to really play. But if we have not really taken those kind of precautions and things like that, probably I think we had to continue. We had to continue, and probably the deal wouldn't have really happened, right? The price that Ola or Uber was willing to pay to us is not because of what we had done. Because of what we had built. We had built a great team, right? And people wanted our team, right? Because they had the same similar product, they had similar marketing and everything, but they didn't really have the access to the kind of team that we had built. The team that works together, irrespective of differences. We agree to disagree, but we work, right? And it was always difficult for them to etc. So Ola raised, so far has raised around $270 million, and we had raised $26 million, right? 1/10 that money that Ola had raised, and we were still a worthy competitor to Ola. And all this was possible because of the kind of team that we had built, and that's the value that people would really pay for. Otherwise, we would have been probably one of those 12 companies who ran for a longer duration than the other companies, and that's the way to really look at it. So irrespective of, so when you are looking at building at whatever stage all you guys are in your startup journey, so don't try to build a company for either scaling or selling, right? I'm pretty sure that you have a great idea, right? Build a phenomenal team and have a great execution, right? Continue having a great execution, right? Don't worry about that, but keep an eye looking out for whatever that is happening across the world or outside your company also. That would essentially help you a great deal. And if you are doing everything right, opportunities will seek you. You don't have to seek opportunities. Opportunities will come to your doorstep and keep knocking on you every time. And you get to decide when to open the door and let the opportunity come in. And once the opportunity comes in, just figure out where your priorities really lie, right? And once you figure out that, so just put that as the center of the negotiation and go ahead and do it. And post the deal closure also, work with the team. People should not be left stranded, right? Even the acquirer should not really feel that I got the wrong end of the stick also, right? The acquirer should know why you are good, right? And that's essentially how things would really be, right? Great guys, thank you, thanks a lot.